Hello, folks. This is Tell Us Your Story. All of us have a story. Your story can encourage, it can inspire, and it can transform a life. And so we ask people to tell us your story. Our guest today is Charles Smith, a lifelong survival of multiple different traumas, including but not limited to being orphaned at a young age, being a homeless veteran, and surviving a suicide attempt. And so we have much more that we can say about Charles, and I trust that he will share this with listeners today. Charles, I got a little information about you as you've shared it with me. Uh, I do know that you were a homeless veteran. We've stated that, and I know that you were an orphan at a young age, and we've kind of
Right.
already talked about that some. Uh, but you also have written a numerous self-help books. I call them self-help, seven of them, and we want to talk about them a little bit today, and I'll let you share. So
Okay.
first of all, would you kind of tell us where you are now living, a little bit about your background for listeners who will know who we are who's sharing with us today.
All right. I live in what people outside of Worcester call Worcester, Massachusetts. A little bit about me. I'm a father, a survivor. I've battled addiction recovery for 30 years. I've had PTSD for going on 42 years. Wow. Yeah, 42 years. And I'd like to say I've had a life unlike most, but that would be naive. And that's why I share my story because I know that there's a lot of people out there that have similar lives like mine.
Well, that's that's a story I know that lots of people have probably experienced. So I know you're not the only one, but I know that you have written a couple of books. You say self-help books. Could you kind of tell us a little bit about your books and what you're trying to share as you write your books?
Yeah, what I try to share is that basically life can be a blessing or it can be a curse, depending
Okay.
on how you look at it.
Hmm.
And I may have lost my parents when I was young. I may have been a homeless veteran, been in a tank explosion in the military. The list goes on and things that I've gone through. But I didn't let them take over my life. I used them to empower me,
Hmm.
to to help others, to support others in similar experiences. And what I do with my books is I show people how to heal from within, not just cover up their wounds. Because a lot of what I talk about, like PTSD, addiction recovery, we look fine on the outside. We're not wearing scars on the outside. We're wearing our scars on the inside. And so we need to heal from within so we can look, you know, presentable on the outside. until we can live the full life that we are meant to live.
Tell me this, what is it like being homeless? Uh, and how did you, uh, I guess I want to say, how did you move past that and just share a little bit about, I know there are other folk who have been homeless,
Mm.
but maybe listeners don't know the extent of what you have to do. What do you, in your survival skills, what is that like?
Well, for me, um, I'll have to start from kind of the beginning. It was I was in a really dark depression, and that was because my uncle and my grandfather died a month apart. My uncle, who raised me as his son, so I was like losing two fathers plus my own. And with that, I became a carver cutting on myself, and then I became so depressed that I tried to take my own life. And I was thrown out of the house that I lived in. And at that point, I was put on the streets, and I I slept where I could. I ate what I could. Um, you learned camaraderie amongst the other homeless veterans, and I call that my crucible because that's what changed my life because of seeing all the other homeless veterans that were out there, in shelters and not in shelters.
Well, this is interesting. uh, You're sharing this information with us, and I assume this all happened after you came out of the service.
Yes, it did.
Okay, and you talked a little bit about PD, PST. I know
PTSD.
PTSD. Uh, how does that affect one? I know some people would like to know that. How does that affect individuals?
Well,
It,
PTSD in a sense is how people are affected by trauma. Some people are affected by trauma, like, they can deal with it and move on. Other people, we deal with it, but we're it's like embedded in us. And it's kind of hard to explain, but it's embedded in us, and we're if we're reminded of it, then we have a flashback, or we have anger issues because we're dealing with it. And it's really uh, something that way back people thought only military personnel would have because of wartime situations. And that's why I went undiagnosed for like 30 years. And then once I found the VA system, I found out that I had PTSD. I actually have complex PTSD, post traumatic stress disorder. And what that is it's multiple multiple PTSDs on top of each other. Like if you have PTSD, like I'll give me my example. My mother's death was my first trigger for
Mhm.
PTSD. Then my my book 10 Homes in 11 Years that tells about everything from my mother's death to my father's death and all the trauma that I suffered in between that. And that that compounded on top of each other. And then I had like a tank explosion, and I had my uncle's death, and my grandfather's death, and this and that, and it all just compounded on top of each other. And that's more difficult to heal because it's more complex. It's more deep inside, so it takes longer to tend with.
Having the PTSD, do you think that was one of the reasons you or had something to do with your considering suicide?
Definitely.
Okay.
Yep, yep. And 22 veterans, approximately 22 veterans every day commit suicide because they don't get the help they need. As sad as that sounds, but we just, as much as the VA does try to help, there's so many veterans out there that need help, and like me, when you get triggered by something so severe as a death or whatever your main trigger is, and that happens to be my main trigger, it often concludes in suicide because you just can't deal with it.
Coming to the realization and seeing all the other folks who are going through these type of things, as you say, the homelessness, and it kind of brought you to a new perspective in life. What was the turning point, or what was it that uh, kind of hit you and made you realize that you had to kind of pull yourself together and get on a different track? Uh, can you share a little bit of that, or am I asking too
Yeah,
much?
no, not at all. I think it was seeing the other veterans around me in veteran shelters and on the streets themselves, and just being in that environment. It showed me, like, for the longest time I thought that I was the only one hurting. Like,
Mhm.
why did God do this to me? You know, I'm God's guinea pig. Why did he pick me? And that shown me different.
Mhm.
And with that, it just sparked in me that, hey, instead of feeling sorry for yourself, you need to feel some pity on these people and help these people. Feel some empathy and help these people. And that's what I started doing.
Your story is so exciting because I can identify with a lot that you went through. I was a compulsive gambler
Uh,
and practiced law for 10 years, lost my license, and as a matter of fact, committed a serious crime. So I know what you are sharing, and I know how something can affect you and you can come out of it. So
mm,
hearing that is great. I just need to ask you this. What is it? Uh, my podcast is actually about sharing your story and sharing the experiences of your life and the events that you've gone through that can help somebody else. So, what would you say uh, those experiences are and events in your life, and how you feel someone can be benefited from it, can benefit from it? What would you say?
well, one of the first things that come to mind is my suicide attempt. I often tell people that was 2001, and I have a 10-year-old son now. 20 years ago, I tried killing myself, and now I have a 10-year-old son. You do the math. If I was successful back then he wouldn't be here.
Mm.
You know, I wouldn't know my 12-year-old daughter. She's not my biological daughter, but I treat her like my own kid. You know, I wouldn't be here talking to you. I wouldn't be a 7-time author. I wouldn't be working in one of the greatest organizations aware of recovery care that I've ever worked for. You know, the list goes on and on. But because I was in such a dark place, I didn't see that. So my lesson in that is just hold on. You know, I was in college a couple of years ago. I graduated top of my class in human services, and I remember um one class we had this girl that always sat in the back of the class, and the teacher came in one day and he said, "Before we start, I need to tell you guys something." And he got teared up like I am right now. And he said, the girl that sat in the back of the class took her own life. She committed suicide over the weekend.
Hmm.
And I was just like, I wish that I could have said something to her. You know, if she only tried talking to us, you know, any of us, I'm sure she would have found that some of us care. You know, but she ended up, I don't know why, but she ended up taking her life. I have a couple of friends in my life that ended up taking their lives, and that's why I say just, hold on, because no matter what happens, we're in some of the darkest times right now, and it's gonna get better. You have to have faith and hope that it's gonna get better.
You're talking to me is powerful, and I know listeners are going to benefit from what you have said. This is amazing to hear those kinds of stories. I pastored uh, for over 31 years after I came out of prison, 5 years in prison,
Hmm.
and became a minister. God called me to that area, and about 3 years, 4 years after I got out, I started pastoring, and I stayed at the same church for over 31 years, retiring at the end of this year. And the reason I started my podcast was to hopefully interview folk just like you who can share their stories, the events in their lives, and can do it in a way that will help others because other folk are going through the same thing that
Exactly.
many of us have gone through. I pulled through it, you pulled through it, and that's the exciting thing about doing this kind of work. Uh,
Hmm.
and so I'm just excited to have you share your story with listeners, and I know they will be benefited from it. Let me uh,
You're welcome.
let me ask you if you would do this. Can you tell us the books or the title of your books and where we can get them from?
Yeah, they're all on lifeexperience.net.
Okay.
And I have books ranging from positive thinking to PTSD, trauma based, to addiction recovery, to life changing. And I'm starting on my memoirs. And like I said, the one that's out right now is 10 Homes in 11 Years. And that's about my first 11 years, and it includes my mother's passing and my father's passing, and him bringing us all around, like out west, and us trying to survive out there as children.
Charles Smith, it has been a pleasure interviewing you today.
You too, James.
Your story has been just amazing, and how you have dealt with it. And I know listeners are going to really be listening to it, and hopefully will benefit from it. And I'm sure they will. So there you have it, Charles Smith, who comes to us as an inspiration of proof that you can overcome the worst life has to offer.
Exactly.
He is a living proof of that. And so we encourage you to check his books out. And I know that you will benefit. Thank you again.
You're welcome.
If you have benefited from this podcast this morning, I ask that you will just not only get those books, but also know that you can also receive inspiration, encouragement, and be transformed by going to the website www.dealbyme.com and purchasing my books, Deal by Me, A Golden Opportunity to Blow, Deal by Me, second edition, self-evaluation. It will definitely inspire you, encourage you, and transform your life. And until now, peace and blessings to each of you.